Good evening. Welcome to tonight's town hall. This is one of several events we've been holding over the last few months to bring you the most up-to-date information about this COVID-19 pandemic and the vaccines that are now available to us. My name is Dr. Sharon Thompson. I am an OBGYN in Phoenix, Arizona, and also a clinical assistant professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Arizona School of Medicine. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we're focusing especially on communities of faith, and our panel tonight includes scientists, science educators, pastors, and counselors. Some people are many of those at one time, and they're all here to share with you and to address your concerns. Our event tonight is sponsored by Mayo Clinic in partnership with ASU College of Nursing and Health Innovation, Central Phoenix Obstetrics and Gynecology, and Bethel Missionary Baptist Church in Tallahassee, Florida. A bit of housekeeping before we begin. We want to keep your concerns front and center. And so in the virtual world, that means these two buttons. We encourage you to talk amongst yourselves in the chat, and we will be there as well, listening in and feeding your concerns and comments into the conversation. But if you have a specific question, please use the Q&A button. That'll flag it for me. And when we have the Q&A session at the end, we'll address all those questions. So without further ado, let's begin. First, we put our money where our mouths are. And so we just showed you a picture of several of the folks on the panel tonight receiving their first or second dose of the COVID vaccine. You'll hear a little bit about that as the evening begins. First up tonight is Dr. Alyssa Shapital. Dr. Shapital is a physician and scientist holding both an MD and a PhD. She trained in critical care, surgical critical care, and currently serves as the medical director for the Mayo Clinic Hospital. She is the hospital's incident command leader for the COVID-19 response. Welcome, Dr. Shapital. She'll talk to us tonight about the risk of COVID infection in minority populations.
Good evening. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm excited to be here to share what I know about COVID-19 and its impact on the United States as well as the minority population. This month marks a year since we had the very first patient in the United States diagnosed with COVID-19, January 20th for the United States. For Arizona, it was January 26th, and we have come a long way since that time. Data gathered early on in the pandemic showed already that communities of color were disproportionately being affected by COVID-19 across the United States and internationally for that matter. Minorities were dying at a higher rate compared to non-Hispanic whites. And the picture still is not very clear as data was incompletely gathered in the beginning and still is. But the fact of the matter is that these patterns still continue, no matter what source you review. I heard a quote that said, "We're breaking all the wrong records for Black and brown people in the United States with COVID." So depending on the sources, we know that nationwide, depending on the state as well, Black people have died at 1.5 to 3.0 times the rate of white Americans. We have lost 61,730 Black lives to COVID to date. Black people account for only 14% of the American population, but over 16% of the deaths. That's 136 deaths per 100,000 African Americans, or 1 in 175 Americans, Black Americans. We see the same disparities in minorities. Other minorities, there are 60,298 Latinos that have died from COVID-19, suffering disease rates at 2.5 times higher than Caucasians. And Native Americans or Indigenous Americans have rates in some areas in the United States that is 5 times higher than their population share. So why? This is not biology. Brown people are not more susceptible to infections. When we look at the clinical and epidemiologic research that is now being published with incomplete data, But we're seeing that the long-standing social determinants of health behind these results. So specific to COVID-19, we know there are implicit biases in medical care across the country, including access to COVID-19 testing, access to treatment, hospital admission rates, all of these things on top of some long-standing healthcare issues. So what can we do right now? We can continue to address equity to care in all aspects of every disease that is plaguing American minorities. But the tools that we have right now are the same that all Americans have, minority or not. We need to continue to be socially distanced. I haven't seen my mother maybe 3 times in person in the whole of 2020. You need to continue to wear your mask, even after you get vaccinated. And that's what we're here for. You need to stay home when you can. And now the sharpest tool that we have in our toolbox for prevention is vaccination. So how do minorities feel about vaccination? We're pretty good with our children getting them vaccinated, but minority vaccination rates for minority adults across the board for influenza, pneumonia, HPV, tetanus are not that good. And America needs minorities to get vaccinated. So if we do the coronavirus math, about 70% in the United States need to be vaccinated to reach this herd immunity concept. So the community immunity. And Caucasians make up about 60% of the US population. So if every Caucasian got the vaccine, the United States would still fall short. But the studies are showing that only 68% of non-Hispanic white Americans would be even willing to get the vaccine. So that would only get us to 42%. And the data shows that 42% of African Americans are willing to receive the vaccine, despite the fact that I just told you, African Americans are more likely than white Americans to be infected with and die from the virus. And add in a potential of 30 to 40% Latino rejection rates, and immunity becomes mathematically impossible. So we're here today to tell you to protect yourselves, get vaccinated. My colleagues will provide you more details around vaccines. Be the example. There's nothing more powerful than someone trusted providing sage advice. Share that vaccination that you get done when you get vaccinated, and then teach everyone about vaccines. So we'll provide that information this evening. So thank you. Again, it's my pleasure to be here.
Dr. Shapital, thank you so much. I know that those statistics she shared were alarming. This disease is alarming. And our job tonight is not to make you fear, but to make you educated and aware. Next up for tonight is Dr. Richard White. Dr. Richard White is an assistant professor of medicine and pediatrics at Mayo Clinic. His particular interest is in diabetes treatment and prevention. And that is particularly significant tonight because we know that diabetes is one of the conditions that increases risk of severe disease with COVID-19. He's going to talk to us tonight about the importance of ongoing chronic disease management, even in the pandemic, and about effective risk communication in support of vaccination among communities of color. Thank you so much, Dr. White.
Dr. Thompson, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Good evening, everybody. Greetings from Florida. I hope that everyone on the call tonight is finding ways to stay connected with loved ones and to continue to be resilient during this difficult year that we've had and that continues. I'd like to sort of frame my comments tonight by using a story. I just, not but an hour or so ago, completed my clinic for this afternoon and had the joy and privilege of following up with one of my dear patients who is an African-American gentleman who is a deacon at his church and is in his early 60s and unfortunately was diagnosed with COVID not but about earlier this month and presented to our emergency room pretty sick. He had evidence of stress to his kidneys, his oxygen levels were very low, and ended up being admitted to our hospital with COVID pneumonia. He spent probably about 8 to 9 days in the hospital. Thankfully, did not have to go to the ICU, but required a significant amounts of oxygen in order to maintain adequate oxygen levels within his blood, and received a lot of the treatments that you guys probably have heard about on the news, including steroids. He did receive some convalescent plasma, which is blood product from individuals who have recovered from the infection that we use to help patients, particularly that are hospitalized, to fight off the active infection. And thankfully, he did not have to go to the ICU, but was able to wean down on his oxygen requirements and discharge from the hospital. When I saw him in clinic this afternoon, we both, shared a greeting, and both. I told him, I said, it was good to see you, and we both shared a moment of being thankful, where we sort of joked tongue in cheek that it was good to be seen. And it was sort of a moment for us to realize, that we were thankful that he survived, that he was still here, that he was able to continue to move forward. He has a way to go as far as recovery is concerned. But as we shared that moment of thankfulness, it got me to thinking about, really what he and I had been focusing on over this past year in terms of his care. Like many African Americans, and as what we've heard already tonight, he deals with several chronic diseases. He has diabetes, he has high blood pressure, he has high cholesterol, and he's obese. And he and I had been working on several of those conditions for a good portion of last year. He's considering some bariatric surgery to help him with his weight loss. But he had been working hard on trying to get to a healthier weight. We have been making some medication adjustments with his diabetes. He is a former smoker and was able to quit smoking back in 2017. And as I was thinking about that, taking care of him tonight, and we were talking about his hospitalization and the things that he has to do in order to continue to recover, it dawned on me that, as sick as he was, I wonder if he may have had even a worse outcome had he not been motivated to really work on managing those chronic illnesses. I use that story to illustrate the importance of continuing to address chronic disease, even amidst the pandemic. The pandemic had paused a lot of outpatient primary care. But as we ramped our practice back up and ensured that our patients, that it was safe to come back to the clinic, whether that was through virtual forms of care or whether that was face-to-face visits, unfortunately, during the pandemic, I've seen a lot of my patients come back with worse diabetes control, having gained weight, their alcohol intake has increased. So we've had a lot of things to talk about, and I try to stress to my patients the importance of continuing to manage chronic disease. As Dr. Shapital mentioned, some of the statistics are alarming in that those that are highest risk for hospitalization and in-hospital mortality or death from COVID-19 are older patients and oftentimes individuals with multiple chronic diseases. 1, 2, 3 or more chronic diseases really increases the in-hospital mortality for patients that are admitted with COVID-19. So I mentioned that story. I'm so thankful that my patient is doing well. He still is on a little bit of oxygen, but we were excited that he's on the road to recovery. He still has some symptoms that unfortunately we are seeing more common in patients that have had COVID. A little bit of some brain fog, still having a little bit of some shortness of breath. The other thing that dawned on me in caring for him was the value of the relationship that we have and the communication that we have together as patient and as a provider. My patient is very activated now to continue to focus on his health. I mentioned to him, the importance of still getting the COVID-19 vaccine even after having had the infection, and he quickly reminded me, "Doctor, not yet. Until 90 days, I need to wait." And so he's very activated, very informed, very knowledgeable about what he needs to do in order to take care of himself. And I really encourage my patients to really focus on advocating for yourself and for your family members, making sure that you're communicating effectively with your healthcare provider, that you're receiving the information in a way that you are able to understand and to use that information to make appropriate decisions with regards to your health. And if there are things that are not clear and are not understood, to be bold and to realize that you have the right to understand the information that's being shared with you. We have a concept in medicine that we call informed consent. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of uninformed dissent with regards to COVID-19 and with regards particularly to the vaccine. So I think communication effectively with your healthcare team is paramount for us to really get beyond this pandemic and for our communities to thrive.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. White. That was a great reminder of the importance of communication and accurate communication. Our next presenter is Dr. Bana Cloche. I'm so thrilled to have him with us tonight. When we talk about being in the room where it happened, he certainly was. He is a professor of medicine and infectious disease with expertise in immunology and immunocompromised patients. He was part of the FDA advisory committee that recommended the emergency use authorization of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. So you're hearing it straight from the room where it happened. Tonight, he'll talk to us about the transparency of that evaluation process and define for us what is emergency authorization use anyway, and also give us a little bit about the potential harms of the vaccine as well as the benefits of the vaccine. We'll need you to unmute Dr. Banicologi. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
And thank you for having me. It's a big pleasure and a great honor to be with all the other panelists and be able to tell you about what I think is very important to know. It's very important to know, number one, the process of development of the vaccines that we have approved in the United States right now has been absolutely transparent. So all the data on the vaccines before they were submitted for approval, all the data has been published in peer-reviewed journals from the beginning, from the response in animal models to the phase 1 trials where different doses of the vaccine were tested to see which one elicited the better immune response, to the phase 2-3 studies with 44,000 patients in the case of the Pfizer vaccine and more than 30,000 patients in the case of the Moderna vaccine. All the information is available. Everything that was submitted to the FDA is, you can find it at the FDA website, or even if you look at if you go to the New York Times website, you will find links to the documents, and all that information is there for anybody to see. And so there's really nothing that is hidden, and there have been no shortcuts. The reason we have been able to develop a vaccine less than a year after discovering a new virus is that our technology is much better than it was in the past, and that these particular 2 vaccines use a novel technology that allows us to synthesize the vaccine in the lab instead of having to grow virus in animal cells or anything like that. So the whole process is much faster, but there have been no shortcuts of any kind in terms of research and absolutely not in terms of safety. I think it's important for everybody to know that. And also it's important for everybody to know what the emergency use authorization means. What it means is that when there is a public health emergency and there's nothing that we know that can be used, the FDA has the power to approve something, to authorize something to be used when the information is not complete. We don't have complete information, and we should not pretend that we do, when all we have is 4 months of follow-up of the patients who have received the vaccine. And so what we do know based on the data is that the benefit of the vaccine seems to outweigh the risk. And that is based both on the data that we have and on what we know about vaccines in general. So the data that we have are that the vaccines are extraordinarily effective. So 94-95% effectiveness, that is outstanding. That is much better than anybody had any hope for. And regarding the side effects, there are side effects, and don't let anybody tell you that there aren't. In fact, more than half the people will have general side effects after the second shot. They may get tired, they may have a headache, they may have muscle aches, they may not feel well for 1 or 2 days, they may have a fever. And most people will have those side effects after the second vaccine. But those side effects are not serious, they are transient, they go away, and they have absolutely nothing to do with having even a mild case of COVID. So what we believe is that clearly the benefits of the vaccine outweigh the risks. We have not seen severe permanent side effects with the vaccines, although now that it's been given to millions of people instead of a few tens of thousands, we are finding many more cases of reactions like the allergic reactions that you may have read in the news and things of that kind. But clearly, in terms of efficacy versus risk, there is no contest with these vaccines. They are definitely good for everybody who wants to not get COVID.
Thank you so much for that summary. I think it's so important, and I want to highlight one of the points that you made about benefit versus risk. Dr. Shapital told us in the beginning about how devastating this disease is. And so we have to look at that devastation when we look at the risk of any potential prevention technique. And so far, what we're seeing from the vaccine is that there's really no competition. COVID disease wins every time against any potential risks of vaccination. And our next speaker will talk to us more about the pandemic and our response and how we can stay healthy. Dr. Angela Allen is a PhD researcher from the Arizona State University College of Nursing and Healthcare Innovation. You can see many of her accolades there, but one that I'll highlight in particular is that she is the lead of the All of Us study with the National Institutes of Health. And that's an innovative program that has a goal of collecting information from multiple communities around the nation in an effort to improve health outcomes and health care access for all of us. So tonight she's going to talk to us more about that program, how it will help her and us learn more about this pandemic and how you can get involved. Thank you so much tonight, Dr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thompson. So let me just share a little bit first and foremost. I want to just include that during these challenging times, we all want to do our part to stop the COVID spread, and we've shared that and heard that through some of the colleagues that have presented. In doing so, we recognize that each one of us is unique and how our bodies react to the virus, other diseases and medications are unique as well. According to a recent survey that was just recently done about a month ago, Kaiser Foundation stated that they found that 35% of the African-American adults stated they were not planning to take the vaccine. It has been shared time and time again, people of color choose not to participate in research, take medication, and in this case, the vaccine, because of the skepticism that relates to historical experiences, such as the Tuskegee study, Henrietta Lack's story, and for the lack of better words, our recent social and civil unrest throughout our country. So people of color have experienced the mistrust, and based on the research that I've done just recently, more directly than indirectly. Also, some may say that they face discrimination in the healthcare system as well as the rest of society. So how can we, and this is where we are, as healthcare professionals and educators, help the community overcome that hesitancy? And can we? And that's been a question that's been asked, and that's why we are here. I often use frameworks when I present or share information. And in this particular case, and many of us know that frameworks are basically a structure or process that we actually deliver or include information to get an outcome. In this particular situation, the framework that I'll be talking briefly about is the framework that's created by Dr. Patel. And that framework is called ASKED, A-S-K-E-D. The first thing as healthcare professionals, we are aware that we have to acknowledge, and that's basically look at the historic reason of people of color that have actually identified that there was mistrust in medicine or in our community. And that can be in the community that we live in, that could be in the community we worship in, socialize in, and even work in. And in my case, as my personal situation, I actually include all areas. And part of it is one of the leads that I do on a weekly basis where I update the community that I serve, talking about the COVID-19, and I've been doing this since the beginning of the COVID. We also look at the skills as healthcare professionals. We have to actually develop the skills, collect important information regarding the population, and listen to the various diseases beyond COVID. Having knowledge, having some type of educational background about the community that we're serving. And encounter, which is extremely important. When we talk about encounter, we're talking about how are we as healthcare professionals engaged in the audience that we are trying to serve. One in particular is now we're doing it virtually. So are we including ourselves in some of the virtual platforms that are actually being presented throughout the different states that we're talking about? And most importantly, the last thing, and I think this is the key, is desire. We have to know that we want to do this. It's not because we have been educated or told to, but because we want to. Because this is a process and it's not just a one-time event as evidenced by what's going on now, regardless of our titles, and I'm talking to the audience, our employment, or even important community stance in which we have, we know that we have a job to do. At this moment, healthcare professionals, we know that one size does not fit all. One medication, one treatment, one regimen for one person. We can overlook the biological variations of the unique human being in which we are servicing. We have to look and imagine our future, where our healthcare is tailored to. The All of Us research, well, that's one of the reasons why I'm part of this team, looks at that. The All of Us research makes a long-term effort to gather information over 1 million people per state. And by the way, Arizona is leading because we are going out and previously knocking on doors, but now we're doing it virtually to include people and recruit people throughout the United States. We're hoping to speed research up and improve health by taking into account individual differences in their lifestyle, socioeconomic status, environment, biological status, so that we can address the particular area that we see in our community. And that's what we call precision medicine. So I look forward to talking to you all a little bit more about all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think one thread that we've been hearing tonight is lots of you out there are hesitant about a vaccine or worried about potential effects of the vaccine. And we want to talk more about that with Dr. Reverend R.B. Holmes. Dr. Reverend R.B. Holmes is the pastor of Bethel Missionary Baptist Church in Tallahassee, Florida, and he serves as the chair of the Florida statewide COVID-19 Vaccine Community Engagement Task Force. Tonight, he wants to talk with all of us about the power of trusted voices in building momentum to take the vaccine, as well as what we've heard, this thread between fear and hope and history and how we move beyond fear to faith. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, Dr. Holmes.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. We appreciate it. One of the primary goals of our objectives of starting the Florida statewide community vaccination engagement and education task force is to bring our people together to encourage them to take the vaccines. We know that we needed to put together community ambassadors who people trust to work with us to say, I believe in science, I believe in doctors, I believe in my pastor and other grassroots leaders that takes this very seriously and believe that these vaccines will literally save lives. It is our goal to have 60 to 70% of African Americans and other minorities vaccinated. Why? Because people of color have died and dying disproportionately. We have to encourage and educate our people to take the shots. Many leaders have rolled up their sleeves to take the shots to show the community that we must do this. We have to lead by example. To this day, less than 5% of the 1.3 million people in Florida who have received at least one dose of the vaccine are Black residents, less than 5%. These numbers are discouraging and depressing, but we cannot give up. We have to work our vision and make sure that the vaccines are accessible and available to people who live in communities where there have been an historic pattern of health deserts, food deserts, poor housing, and digital divide. We will open up 40 plus vaccination sites at the 4 HBCUs in the state of Florida, as well as Black and brown churches and neighborhood community centers. These trusted voices and trusted venues will help us to leave no community behind and achieve our objectives. We are fully aware of the hesitation, doubt, and distrust in reference to vaccines. The Tuskegee experiment and mistreatment of some Black patients are real. However, we will work extremely hard to convince our people that we can trust the science, we can trust each other, and we cannot continue to live this way. The Bible says, know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Black communities have higher rates of documented COVID-19 cases, 3 times likely to die from this virus than whites. For us, for me, and as far as my household, this is a moral call and cause to defeat and combat this deadly virus. Why sit here and die and wait for somebody to lead us to the promised land? We walk by faith and not by fear. For God did not give us the spirit of fear, but of love and power and wisdom and of a sound mind. There's an old hymn in the Baptist church that goes like this: a charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, who gave his son my soul to save, and fitted for the sky to serve this present age, my calling to fulfill, made all my powers engaged to do my master's will. Saving lives is the master's will.
Thank you so much for that. I think that we're certainly giving you a lot to think about, and we have one more presentation to add to the information you've already gotten. Dr. Pablo Moreno Franco is an assistant professor of medicine and a transplant critical care intensivist at Mayo Clinic. He served as medical director in the medical ICU and is currently medical director for the transplant critical care service. Tonight, he's going to talk to us about, are there reasons to delay getting the vaccine? And also, what are the emerging strains? You've probably seen some reports in the news about new strains. What do those mean to us, and what do they mean in terms of the vaccine? And also importantly, there are several varieties of vaccine out there. Can you get both? Should you wait between doses? So he'll cover all those questions for us. Thank you so much, Dr. Moreno Franco, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson, for the kind introduction and the opportunity to, discuss with everyone about the COVID vaccine, how to best use it, and when you may want to delay getting it. So there are very, very few reasons to delay getting the COVID vaccine. The most important one is if you are in quarantine for a presumed exposure to somebody with COVID. The second one is if you're actually in isolation after being diagnosed or having a positive COVID test. And the third one, and I appreciate that Dr. White shared that within the example of the patient that he took care of today, it's somebody who has already had COVID and has received specific treatment, which includes the convalescent plasma or the monoclonal antibody. So receiving one of these 2 treatments should, then be a cause of delaying the vaccination for about 90 days, but they should still be vaccinated after recovering, from COVID. But it's also important to take a step back and say, who should get vaccinated? And, anybody who is above the age of 16 should be eligible, including, pregnant women who are lactating, immunocompromised patients. That's a question that we get very frequently, and even patients who have had a prior COVID-19 infection. And that's the example that we were sharing with you just a minute ago. Who should not get vaccinated? Well, that's a very, very small percentage. Only, the vaccine hasn't been tested on individuals younger than 16 years of age. And also, individuals who have had an anaphylactic reaction to the components of the vaccine should not be vaccinated. Beyond that, there are certain groups of individuals where particular precautions should be had. So for example, somebody with allergies to other IV medications should have their vaccine done in a very controlled setting where there's ability to respond in case an allergy occurs. We already spoke about the convalescent plasma or monoclonal antibodies causing a delay of about 90 days. And if somebody has had other vaccines within 14 days or so, and we'll be describing that a little bit more in detail in a minute. We also wanted to talk about the emerging strains of COVID, and you may have heard about the so-called UK strain. So this is a particular variant of the virus that started in England around August of last year, and it particularly caused some of the effects that we saw in England in November and up to January. There's also another strain called the South Africa strain that also has some changes in the proteins that are in the surface of the virus. But be that as it may, there's no reason to believe that these new strains of COVID-19 will be resistant to the vaccines that we already have. In fact, many of the companies that have made these vaccines have already run the testing, and overall it's a very favorable picture. What we're seeing that the vaccine is still very helpful for all these different strains. So furthermore, there's no evidence that any of the available therapies that we use, in the hospital should not be effective against, the new strains. So there's no reason to, panic or worry about those strains at this time. The other piece we wanted to cover briefly is that of timing of the vaccine, particularly in relationship to other vaccinations. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is if somebody has had the COVID vaccine, can they have another type of vaccine in their relative same time? Usually it's recommended to wait about 14 days. So for example, if you are going to get also the influenza vaccine, you should do it either 14 days before or 14 days after you get the COVID vaccine. And that doesn't mean that, we're concerned about getting both of them in a short amount of time, but we want to make sure that they're spaced about 14 days, just in case anybody is to have a reaction to the vaccine, then we can better identify which, vaccine the reaction could have been related to. So it's just a precautionary measure. That's really what it is. And then the other comment that Dr. Thompson was asking is, how about, mixing different types of COVID vaccine? And that's really not the recommendation. The recommendation is to, once you get the first dose of a particular vaccine, that you should get the second dose with the same, type of vaccine. Usually the two COVID vaccines are separated by either 21 days or 28 days, depending on the specific vaccine that is used. But it's also important to realize that you don't exactly have to get it 21 or 28 days later. You could delay that further if, let's say, the vaccine was not available in that day or you're working that day. It could be delayed several days or even weeks and still be effective. So really, we have no concern about the safety or effectiveness of the COVID vaccine in the individuals, despite having these new strains that have been reported. And we truly want to encourage our community to, as soon as a vaccine is available to them, that they should take it. One of our infectious disease colleagues was writing an article recently to say that the best COVID vaccine is the one that you have access to, and you should definitely, at the first opportunity, go ahead and have your vaccine.
What a great presentation, and a fantastic one to end on, because I think that you touched on many questions that have been coming up. One that has been coming up in the Q&A is, what are the differences between the vaccines that are available to us? Are they exactly the same? Dr. Shapital, I know that was a topic you ran out of time to talk to us about. So if you can take that first, and then maybe we can have some other panelists address it as well.
So I don't mean to defer it to Dr. Bonacloche, but he began the topic on the two available mRNA viruses or vaccines, and then I know there's a DNA one that has come out as well. So perhaps Dr. Bonacloche can discuss the different vaccines. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you. The vaccines that are available, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, they use the same technology. They give you the RNA of a copy of the RNA that is in the virus, that is the blueprint to make inside your own cells the spike protein of the virus. And the technology is so similar that what the CDC says is that, yeah, you should try to stick with the one that you received the first dose with. But in case of emergency, in case of absolute necessity, you received one and that one is not available anymore and is not going to be available in your state for whatever reason, it's possible to get the second dose from the other company. So they are extremely similar. The technology that is used to get the DNA into your cells is different, but essentially they do the same thing. And that is the reason probably they have the same efficacy, 94 and 95%. So those are the ones that we have most information about. Then there are other vaccines coming that we are hearing about, the Moderna, the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, things that the AstraZeneca will be 2 shots, the Johnson & Johnson will be 1 shot. But I think that, as Dr. Moreno Franco said, you should get whatever is available to you. So the vaccines are working and they are safe. And they definitely, what we can say with a lot of confidence is that they are good for you, because if you get the vaccine, we know that your chances of getting symptomatic COVID-19 are extremely low. So we hope that they will be good for the community, but we know that they are good for you. You should try to get them.
Thank you so much for that. A related question in terms of taking the vaccine that's available to you is, who are the priority groups? Who is the vaccine available to right now? I know there was a question in the Q&A about some issues around prioritizing in Florida in particular, but I think this is a question for anyone, wherever they are in the country. To whom is the vaccine available right now, and when will it be available to the general public? I'm not sure who wants to jump on that one, maybe Dr. White or, oh, thank you so much, Reverend Holmes.
Well, I don't, unfortunate, what the governor of Florida did was sign an executive order to start with persons 65 years and older, and then all persons in convalescent homes. So that's his strategy, and we're trying to move them now to deal with teachers and frontline workers and healthcare professionals. And really men and women in prison who are coming out to make sure they've been tested and receive the vaccine. If not, they're going to be a super spread in the communities.
Sure. So I think it's important for everyone in the audience to realize that it differs by state. So you want to keep an eye or an ear on what's happening in your state in terms of priority groups, because different states have made different priority areas for the initial vaccination, but that will continually change. So keep your ear to the news about that. Another question that was in the chat mentioned some deaths that happened after vaccination. I have not personally heard about deaths. I wonder if anyone who's been on the panel has heard about any deaths after COVID-19 vaccination.
Well, let me address that because we got that question on the first town hall when there was no widespread experience giving the vaccine to millions of people across the country, but there was just the experience with the 44,000 volunteers in the Pfizer vaccine. And so I think that is important for everybody to understand is that if you collect 44,000 people and you follow them carefully during the next 4 months, some people are bound to die. That is going to happen just because people are dying all the time. And so in that particular study, there were 8 deaths. 2 happened in the vaccine group and 6 happened in the placebo group. And somehow that got lost. And when people start sending messages through the social media, that get lost in the details are important. And so clearly there were deaths and deaths are happening. So Hank Aaron had gotten his vaccine a couple of weeks before he died, but he was 80-some years old, and 80-some years old people die. And so to establish that a particular death is caused by the vaccine is difficult in any event. Definitely there was no increased number of deaths when the studies were done and people very carefully counted. And I haven't heard any indication that people who are getting vaccinated are dying more than you would expect them to die. People die.
Thank you for that. I think that Dr. White had reminded us that chronic disease continues even in the midst of the pandemic. And so we have to keep that in mind, that we have other health conditions that can impact our life, our health, and our death, in addition to the pandemic, and not to rush to make connections where maybe there might not be one. Thank you for that great answer. Someone else in the Q&A asked the question, what distinction, if any, is there between the Tuskegee experiment and this vaccine distribution? That person said they perceive this as a concern in the Black community, I presume. They said our community, but I assume they're meaning Black. Reverend Holmes, do you want to talk about that a little bit? And then maybe we can shoot to one of the other panelists as well.
Yeah, the Tuskegee experiment was evil. You can't find a better way. It was evil. These vaccines have been proven to be effective, and as we know, that there was an African American who were part of the initial development of one of these vaccines, and we have trusted voices. I mean, there's some people, even all of you on this panel, you are trusted voices. I think that we understand the history. That is a very painful history, but I don't believe that there's any tricks in these vaccines trying to kill Black folk or brown folk. If we don't take the vaccine, it will kill us if we don't take it. So I think I like what Doctor said. I think the risk, you got to look at the risk versus benefits and history versus hope.
And this is Dr. Allen. I want to also add to that. With the Tuskegee study, and I believe Reverend Holmes pointed that out, that was predominantly all African Americans. In this vaccine, we're looking at everyone being involved. In addition to that, with the Tuskegee, it was prior to what we call IRB, and that's the review board who basically looks over studies to determine if there are some risk, if you may, to humans. Now, in any research that we do look at the IRB board, or the IRB board look at particular studies. The nice about the IRB board are they are basically made up of community representatives, clinicians, researchers, and healthcare providers who will stop any type of study, even a vaccination or any other method that they believe will damage or cause any hurt, harm, or danger to a human. So we have to look at that. And I want to add that the IRB also utilizes Tuskegee as an example of what we no longer are doing.
I would also add that in Tuskegee, that was an example of a known treatment that was beneficial being withheld to African Americans, right? And right now we're talking about a treatment that we are advocating as something that is proven to prevent a disease that's available, and then there's some hesitancy within the community to receive it. So just like Reverend Holmes said, you have people, this panel out there advocating for you to go and get it so you don't get in that group that is withheld. So there's some issues, and I think that came up in the chat about prioritization. There's differences in who should be first in the line by state, but you should know that folks like us are out there advocating to bring the vaccine to the communities of color, to put individuals who are highest at risk in the front of the line, but their treatment is available for all.
Dr. Thompson, I think that, and this is non-political, but we have great faith in the Biden-Harris administration. They are sincerely focusing on COVID-19 as one of their major initiatives, and they have surrounded themselves with a task force that we all can appreciate and can affirm.
I'd just add to that too, that thank you, Reverend Holmes, for encouraging us to acknowledge that Tuskegee occurred. It's a painful part of African-American history. It's a blemish on science in this country. But what we're seeing now with the development of the vaccine and the transparency that Dr. Benacloci mentioned is in stark contrast to what we saw happen with Tuskegee. That trial went on for more than 40 years. If there were any nefarious type of activities even close to that, it wouldn't last more than a week, I'm sure, with all the oversights that we have now in this country. What I mentioned earlier about informed consent and concepts along those lines are a direct result of the errors and of the lessons that were learned painfully in this country because of what happened with Tuskegee. So as painful as part of our history as that is, I encourage all of my African American family members, friends, colleagues to understand that Tuskegee is a part of our history, but it's not a part of our present, and that we have an opportunity to move beyond that and to get to a point where we're able to trust the good science that's taking place now and protect ourselves and advocate for the health of our communities.
Thank you all for that. I think that that is such an important part of the history to acknowledge. And I think that we've heard from other panelists tonight this notion of trust, and not just blind faith, but finding folks in your community who are in positions that you respect and who have proven themselves to you and taking their counsel. So none of us here are telling you to just blindly go out and do what the man says to do, but to listen to the trusted voices who've proven themselves to you. And I think that we've come such a long way since Tuskegee in terms of the development of the African-American community and places where we are. One of us was one of the lead researchers in developing one of the vaccines. And so you certainly will be able to find those trusted advisors in your own communities. Farhia, can you give me a time check? Do we have time for a few more questions?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think I heard this said earlier, but I want to highlight. Someone asked in the Q&A, how long after having COVID disease can you get vaccinated? How long do you have to wait?
Yeah, I think I can.
Dr. White, you want to take that? Oh, go for it.
First
Dr. Moreno Franco.
Yeah, so, the key concept is that of isolation, right? So once somebody has, been diagnosed with COVID, we typically, ask that individual to stay in isolation for a period of time. And that period of time depends on the severity of their disease. If it's a severe that is mild, that isolation time, it's only, about 10 days. If it's a more moderate or severe disease, the isolation time is more of 20 days. And while you're in isolation, that is a time not to get the vaccine. So in other words, once the isolation period is done, then the individual can, of course, seeking advice from their, primary provider, then seek for a good time to get vaccinated. I'm not sure if others in the panel have other comments.
I was wondering if Dr. Bonacloche could go over the reason why some people may say, well, I was infected, so my immune system should take care of any future vaccine or any future infections. So why should I get a vaccine after being infected?
Yeah, I don't think that would be wrong. I think that what we know from natural infection is that you have at least antibodies for 3 months, and you are probably protected for that time. And so what I would say is that getting vaccinated a month after getting COVID is a waste of vaccine because you don't need it at that point. So that is that person who thinks that is right. And so I think that waiting the 90 days, because that may be the time that your natural immunity to COVID is waning, that is when you want to get the shot. I would say that. But keep in mind that we know that it's safe to get it earlier. So if it happens, we know that nothing bad happens to you if you get the vaccine accidentally or not knowing, because there were cases like that in the studies. It doesn't seem to create any kind of problem. It's just that you are getting something that is not of great benefit to you. But yeah, I personally would have waited 90 days after getting over COVID.
Thank you for that. And I'll follow that with another question about how the vaccine can affect you. Someone asked the question, can the vaccine affect the DNA in my cells?
No, that's one of the few questions that one can be very clear about. The RNA in the vaccines doesn't get to the nucleus of the cells where the DNA is. It cannot touch your DNA. It cannot mess up with your DNA. So I hate giving very categorical answers to questions because there's always some nuance in everything, but no, the RNA vaccines cannot change your DNA. You can get other worries, but not that one.
That's good to know. Anyone else want to jump in on that one? I think that was a pretty clear answer. Another question that we have in terms of the effects, this person says, how do we know the vaccines are safe when they're so new? Couldn't they cause problems that we don't yet know about, long-term issues?
Yeah,
Dr. Bonacloche, I'll have you start on that one.
I get that a lot. And I think I mentioned in my initial presentation that we have only followed these people in the studies very carefully for 4 months. So the question is a reasonable question. You say, okay, how do you know that that my arm is not gonna fall off for 2 years from now, and it's gonna be from the vaccine? And the reason we cannot know 100%, but what we do know is that the real side effects of the vaccine, not the crazy things like autism and things that have been debunked, but the real side effects that follow vaccinations, they typically happen within 6 weeks after the vaccine, at most after 8 weeks. And so for this particular question, are there side effects, serious side effects about this vaccine? Based on what we know from other vaccines, waiting 4 months gives us enough information to say that you shouldn't worry about that. Again, worry about other things, but you shouldn't worry about that.
So how long does immunity from the vaccine last? Will you need to get a vaccine every year like we do for the flu?
We don't know. We know that you are protected for about 4 months, and we know that the response to the vaccine that we can measure in the lab lasts for about that time. We don't know what is the longest that it lasts. If I had to make a guess, I would guess that we will need to get vaccinated from time to time, and that probably the vaccines will change depending on the variants that are circulating in any particular year. So I don't think that anybody can know this for sure, but my own guess is that we will be tweaking the vaccine and having things not very dissimilar from what we have with the flu shot, that is different every year, and that is, except that we will be able to be much more nimble and react to changes in the virus much faster with these new technologies. But yeah, I anticipate frequent revaccination.
I've heard it several times now about information that we need to get in the future. What studies are going on to gather this information? I've heard a lot about the studies that led up to development of vaccine, but how are we going to get this information?
I could take a start with this. So it's very fortunate that there's a lot of organization about the delivery of the COVID vaccines. And that includes some nice apps or websites organized by the Central Disease Control, in which when you receive your COVID vaccination, you're actually invited to participate on reporting, how you do with the vaccine and different types of questions. So that's an excellent way to know real time how people are doing after the vaccine. And I think that's where a lot of the reassurance that Dr. Benacloche was speaking about, that's where a lot of that reassurance comes from, because it's not only based on the thousands of people that were part of the initial studies, but it's now hundreds, thousands or millions of people who have gotten the vaccine so far.
That's great. Thank you for that. It's good to know that there will be ongoing collection of data, so we'll learn more as time goes on. A few people asked the question, how long does it take the vaccine to take effect? Are you immune immediately after the first shot, or is it not until the second one?
I think that you can see protection, clinical protection, the difference between the people who receive the vaccine and the people who receive the placebo is obvious after 9 days. And you don't see any better protection after the second shot. What happens after the second shot is that probably is going to prolong your response. You are going to be immune for longer. But the vaccine, the first shot of the vaccine is as effective, as protective as the 2 shots. We just don't know for how long. But you get very good protection starting at day 9.
Thank you. And someone asked the question, so after I'm vaccinated, can I stop taking precautions?
I think I have 2 answers for that. The answer is no, but I have 2 reasons for that. One reason is that the 94-95% protection that was reported in the studies was with the vaccine plus the social isolation. So everybody in the study was using the social isolation. So we don't really know exactly what the protection of the vaccine would be if you were not following the measures that everybody followed in that study. That's one answer. And then the other answer that I heard this morning on the radio when Dr. Fauci was asked that same question is that we don't know yet for sure that the vaccine prevents asymptomatic infection. We believe that it does, but we don't know it for sure. And what we do know protects you from asymptomatic infection is the social distancing. So you should continue using the social distancing measures that we know are effective to decrease the transmission.
Thank you for that. Following on that question, someone asked a question. She says, I'm a breast cancer survivor. Should I worry that the vaccine can aggravate previous cancer? And that reminds me, how about if you've had an organ transplant? Should those folks be worried about getting vaccination?
Well, I can.
Dr. Moreno-Franco, thank you.
Yeah, I can definitely speak about the transplant piece. So we know that being an organ transplant recipient actually puts individuals at increased risk of not only contracting COVID, but having some of the more severe forms of COVID. So these individuals are actually more, encouraged or have even, greater advantage of getting vaccinated. So being immunocompromised either by, being an organ recipient or having had a malignancy with the chemotherapy and all the things that go with that, that absolutely is not a contraindication for the vaccine. In fact, if anything, it should actually encourage, individuals even more to get vaccinated. Regarding this, the initial part of the question, regarding concerns about cancer, activation, I think we really have to go back to the science that Dr. Banacloche spoke about. So particularly, these vaccines that are simply made of RNA, so they're not going to modify your DNA. They're not even going to get into the nucleus of the cell. They're just going to stay in the outside and help produce the proteins that, the immune system is going to identify. So I think, in short, having had a malignancy should not be a concern regarding, getting the vaccine. It actually should encourage people to do it.
Thank you. Any other panelists? Someone asked a question about children. What is the status of vaccination for children?
I think that those are one of the priority groups that are being studied now in new studies. So children were excluded from both the Pfizer and the Moderna initial studies. So we don't have data on that, and that is clearly a priority at this point.
And I would just add to that that even though COVID infection in general is not as severe in children, there are some children that have had severe inflammatory response to the COVID infection, and there have been some pediatric deaths across the country. So until, as Dr. Blanacocci was mentioning, until that vaccine for those age groups are available, it's important for children to continue to self-isolate and to follow those protective measures as well. I saw a 5-year-old in clinic last week who was very able to very eloquently explain to me why she was wearing her mask. So, the CDC recommends that children 2 and above who are able to mask do so. And so I think it's important for people to understand that children need to follow those measures as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Someone asked a very good question about cost of the vaccine. So who's paying for vaccines? What if you're uninsured? How do you get a vaccine? Anyone want to speak to that one?
I can speak to that. So the federal government is paying for the vaccines at this time. The question was, will they continue to do that? And that is a great unknown, right? Depending on how long we need vaccines, will we need vaccines every year? But at this time, the government is paying for those. So some of you may be signing up to get vaccinated, and a lot of times, at least I know in Arizona, they ask for your insurance information, but if you don't have insurance, that does not mean that you can't get a vaccine.
And I'd like to also add, Dr. Shapital, that the cost of the vaccine, when they do ask for your insurance, they're asking because it's the administrator. So it could be the person who's actually giving you the vaccine, whereas you have nurses and other healthcare providers that are delivering the vaccine. They have to get paid for their time. So and it's a very minimal cost for that administrator.
So I think that's another good reason to get the vaccine early and not delay, because we don't know what the reimbursement will be in the future, but we know right now, if you are in one of the priority groups in your state and the vaccine is available to you, take advantage of it. That opportunity may be more difficult later on. So take advantage of what we know now. Let me see, I think there was one other question I wanted to get to from the chat. Hang on one sec. Got to pull up the screen here. Someone asked the question, and I think it was mentioned, but I want to highlight it because the question came up. If you only get one dose of the vaccine for whatever reason, are you okay? Do you have to worry about getting the second dose? You're scared of shots, you passed out. Are you fine, or do you need to make it a priority to get that second dose?
Well, because I had mentioned it before, let me elaborate on my answer. We just don't know how long the protection of one dose lasts. We know that you are protected. We know that. We know that if you get the 2 doses with the scheme of giving the doses that both Pfizer and Moderna have studied the vaccines, we know that you are protected for 4 months, but we do not know how long you would be protected with one single dose. We don't know because we don't have the data. And so what you have in that situation is a lot of opinions of different experts on the matter, but because you don't have the data, you don't have the data. So I would encourage everybody who gets one shot to get the second shot. But it has happened in the past with other vaccines that at the beginning, when they come into market, the pharmaceutical company recommends 2 or 3 shots, and then over the years we discover that 1 shot is enough. I think that is unlikely with the coronavirus because of what we know about the duration of immune response to coronavirus, but the truth is that we don't know how long the protection given by 1 dose would last. And so I think that it's the sensible thing to do is to get the 2 shots.
And what about the different vaccines that are available to us now, and maybe the one that's coming? I think, Dr. Bandaclocha, you mentioned that there are 2 other vaccines that will be on the market eventually. Can you mix and match?
Well, I again, without having data, it's a matter of making guesses. I think that doesn't sound like a good idea to me. I think that it's unlikely that anything bad is going to happen to you by doing that, but it doesn't seem very smart. I think that we have enough trouble with things that we know work and we know the side effects and so on, to start doing things that we don't know what they work and what the side effects can be. I mean, I wouldn't go there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're learning tonight is that what we know is that COVID-19 is a devastating disease. Many people have become ill and died from it. And so we know that devastation exists. So any other risk is small in comparison to that. I think that's struck home for me as a key from tonight's all the panelists. I want to ask about another population that I don't think we've talked about very much, and that is pregnant women and lactating women. What is the recommendation for them in terms of vaccination? What do we know about their risks and benefits?
We know that they were excluded from the studies. So that's one thing we know. So if you were pregnant, you could not participate in the study. And we also know that the women that were in the study and got pregnant, because if you follow many thousands of women during several months, some women are going to get pregnant. We know that in that small group, there were no noticeable side effects or fetal malformations or anything that suggested the vaccine was bad for you. But when you have an unknown, you end up with different recommendations. So as I said, the children are a priority now, and also pregnant and lactating women are a priority now. We know we need data. The data we have, which are scant data, the data we have don't suggest that there's any risk for pregnant women or lactating women, but there are no good data. There are very few data. And so that is something where I think that a lot of experts recommend go ahead and don't worry. And other experts say, well, I don't have data. Why don't you wait until the data are out?
Are there any concerns about fertility from vaccination?
No.
Very simple, no. So I know some people out there were concerned about that or had heard that rumor. I want to give the opportunity for the panelists to talk about what's the one thing you want people to hear from tonight? I know we've covered a lot. So if you have one thing that we didn't mention that you want folks to know or that you might have heard in your community that you think it's important to share, I want to give the opportunity for the panelists to talk about that thing. I'll go around my screen just for the sake of clarity here. Let's start with Dr. Pablo Moreno Franco. What's burning on your mind that you want people to know?
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Being an ICU provider, I have been many times in the past year in a very unfortunate situation, having somebody young with family, small, children at home, and being in a situation that they got COVID, and unfortunately, they got the severe kind enough to end up in an intensive care unit. And it's not a good situation for anybody. It's not a good situation for a patient who is struggling to get air and enough oxygen. It's not a good situation for their family because they cannot come and visit them. And it's not a good situation for us because, we do our very, very best to save every patient, but sometimes that is not possible despite our best efforts. To me, that highlights the importance of any prevention measure that can be used. The mask, the distancing, and particularly getting the vaccine. I think these are the reasons why all our public should continue to do those measures and seek vaccination.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Allen.
So for me, what I'd like to share is as a qualitative researcher, and many of us are familiar with qualitative, we hear the voice of our community, of the patients, their family members who have lost loved ones, those who are even now dealing with the chronic aftermath of COVID-19. We hear their voices. I work in the community a lot, and I hear the stories of why people choose not to take the vaccine and why people choose to take the vaccine. As a quality researcher, I also look at the clinical aspect. This is where the community does not see the healthcare providers who are now seeing people die, 3 and 4 people a shift, whereas they would actually experience that in a month. And so that again speaks volumes. But what I've learned to become recently is a quantitative researcher because numbers speaks volumes. Over 23,000 articles have been written in less than a year on COVID-19. And I wish I could read them all, but I know that there are stories behind them. And as Dr. Shapital has pointed out, the numbers of those who have died, those who have lost loved ones. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I can tell you, an island we call Bill Isle used to be an area where we would laugh and have fun and look at the waters, but now it's an area inundated with pictures of loved ones who have transitioned, even law enforcement leaders who have made their transition in unfortunate situations. So if I had one lasting word, you saw the picture on the second slide. Most of us have gone through the vaccinations, and we didn't do it just because we wanted to. We did it because we had to. We had to show you that this is not what we consider the Tuskegee study or other studies. This is real, and it's not going away until we make a difference, like Dr. Shapital stated. 60 to 70% of our people need to be vaccinated for us to move around this country. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Reverend Holmes?
Yeah, as a pastor, been doing this for 4 decades. I never have done so many funerals of parishioners who died because of COVID-19. Every day, definitely every other day, someone will call me and say, got a loved one who's died, has contracted the coronavirus on a ventilator. We will lose in the end of this month, February, 500,000 Americans in 1 year. In World War II, 400,000 great soldiers died in 4 years. In 1 year, close to 500,000 Americans have died. So what the takeaway here is, thank God that these vaccines are a gift of life. And we must advocate for our people to understand that these are not fake numbers. These are real numbers. We're losing people daily. One data said, and I mean, so if you're talking about 4,000 people dying every day, and that does not move you, and this is not a movie. This is moving life, and I think as a pastor, and I really appreciate you physicians and healthcare professionals, because what you're doing, saving lives, you who are working in the research area, you guys are our sheroes and heroes. And as a minister, I really appreciate you. I believe in medicine, I believe in mercy, and I believe in common sense.
Thank you for that. Dr. Shapital?
Yes, amen to that. 1 in 1,000 Latinos dead from this disease, 1 in 735 African Americans. And I can tell you, Dr. Allen, my dad has sent me pictures, at least 2 of his friends on Belle Isle who've passed away from this disease. And this is serious. This is serious. And so as I ended my presentation, protect yourself, get vaccinated. Be the example, let everybody know that you got vaccinated, and teach everyone everything you know about this disease and vaccines.
Thank you. Dr. White?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Thompson. This, for me, has just been a powerful session, just being able to hear from my colleagues. I continue to learn a lot from each of these sessions that are done. And as a primary care provider, I can attest that many of my patients have come into the clinic and expressed distress just over the whole situation, fatigue from being disconnected from loved ones. The way that COVID has disrupted our lives is causing a lot of people to really just be tired and wanting to be done with all of this. As much as that's true, I encourage people that we can't let down our guard. We can't allow fatigue to cause us to make rash decisions. We have heard a lot of strong scientific evidence supporting the fact that the vaccine is effective. And I really view this as an opportunity for Black and Brown communities to be proactive. I personally am tired of seeing the disparities in health inequities impacting our nation. And I think that we have an opportunity, and it's time for our communities to advocate for ourselves and to be proactive in taking charge of our health. And this is one opportunity for us to do so by getting vaccinated ourselves and by encouraging our loved ones and family members and neighbors to do the same, because we know the vaccine can save lives. And now is our chance to do so. So just thank you for the opportunity to share with you all tonight, and Godspeed as we continue to move forward through this.
Thank you. Dr. Menacloche, final words. And if you could, as you do that, tell us a little bit about the vaccine and allergies. I saw some last minute questions about allergies in the chat.
Yeah, so let me first address the allergies. I think that the only true contraindication is allergy to the vaccine. So if you know that you're allergic to the components of the vaccine, then you should not get the vaccine. All the other allergies, severe respiratory allergies, severe food allergies, they're not a reason to not get the vaccine. So I think that's important to know. But that brings me to what I wanted to say to finish. So the Tuskegee study was a secret kept for 40 years. We live in a very different time. When I said that the development of this vaccine has been transparent, it is transparent. Anybody can access the information. Anybody can see those tables. The data that Dr. Shapital gives about the inequality in deaths and inequality in severity of the disease, those are in the CDC website. I mean, that is the federal government telling you the injustice in our country. So you don't need to look for conspiracy theories. You don't need to go to Facebook to hear crazy things. we live in a much more open society. The information is there for you to get. And if you don't know how to get it, ask your primary care provider, ask the physician, ask someone who can guide you. Go to the Mayo Clinic website, go to the CDC website, to the FDA website, and ask questions. And I think very important, understand that in science, any truth that we have is provisional. It's bound to be changed. What we know today is less than what we will know 6 months from now. And so we want to provide the most clear information. And some things, when we don't know them, we don't know them. And just we should try to be humble and accept that there are things that we don't know. And you should ask your providers to be open and to be honest. And as someone said, the truth will make you free. And the truth sometimes is that we are not sure, but we are clearly trying to do the right thing and showing all the information that we have that makes us believe we are doing the right thing.
Thank you so much. I don't think I have much more to say in terms of wrapping up. We came together tonight to bring you information, and I hope that we have done that. We have shared the extent of what we know. We shared what we don't know. And the summary that I've gotten out of tonight, and I think you have too, is that the coronavirus is very dangerous to us, to our health, and to our communities. And that vaccine is one of the tools, one of the most powerful tools in our toolkit to help us address this disease, and we should take advantage of it. I hope that you have learned a lot from what you've heard tonight. Before you sign off, we have one more question for you. Before tonight, I think many of you, as you registered, did a pre-test that gave us some information, and we'd love it if you can do this closing poll. It helps us to get a sense of our impact so that we can bring programs to you that are informative and helpful. So take a minute for us tonight and do this poll, answer this question before we part for the evening. Thank you so much for your attention. As you do the question, I want to thank all the panelists tonight for giving us of their time and their expertise. I don't know about you, but I certainly learned a lot that I can share with my family, my friends, and my community. Thanks so much to the folks at Mayo Clinic, both in Arizona and in Florida, for being the tech help behind this great presentation tonight. We appreciate all of you being with us. Thank you, and there are the results. We talked about being transparent, so we're sharing with you the results of our poll. We are recording this seminar, and I believe it will be posted on YouTube. Correct me if I've got that wrong, but it will be available. I know some of you had asked that question in the chat. So you will be able to come back to this information again and again, and to share it also with your community. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and good night.
Great job, Dr. Thompson. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. God bless you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Great
Thank
job.
you, all the panelists. Have a great night.